after the main presentation. There you go, we're recording. Awesome,
Great, yeah.
thank you. I just noticed my coffee cup matches my background. That wasn't intentional, but it's so lovely to be coordinated. Thank you for those great resources, Caroline. They all look great. So Paul gave you a little bit of information about how we started, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and how to effectively use our voting guides in your voter engagement and specifically on campuses. So as Paul mentioned, and as you all may have noticed, this past week changed things a lot in this race this year. We used to joke on meetings such as this and, say, it's a race between Biden, Trump, and the couch is winning. But obviously that has kind of changed. The landscape has changed dramatically in the past week. And so we did a lot of work last week in order to get this new guide turned around as quickly as possible. And as Paul mentioned, Teen Vogue has already featured our new guide as a swift follow-up to the previous article they had published about 2 weeks ago for us. You have 2 QR codes on the screen here. One will bring you directly to our Guides.vote website, and the other one is our Instagram. So please give us a follow if you haven't already. We've got great shareable content on there that you are welcome and actually encouraged to use on all of your sites. So make sure to scan both of those and they'll bring you to our site and to our social media. So as you can see from this picture, I was so glad to update this this week. You're probably actually some of the first to start seeing our guide. We just published it and made it live on Monday. And as Paul mentioned too in our origin story, we wanted to produce guides that were really simple and easy to understand. So we have an issue-centered approach. And this is really key to effectively using the guides and making them really, really usable in your voter engagement. So just to give you a little bit of a closer look at the guides, they're super easy to understand, side-by-side issue-oriented guides. This makes it really simple when you're using it, say, for example, on campus. So if you're using it for clubs or organizations or societies, they can pick a certain issue and be able to start a conversation in that way. It's all just alphabetical. Kamala Harris is not first. Her name just comes first in the alphabet. So the same with, we are not prioritizing abortion or climate change. They just simply come first in the alphabet. So they are very methodically put together. Just to give you an idea, given that it's, so recent, of how we go about putting our guides together, because, myself included, I know there's always skepticism behind, but is it really nonpartisan? We are really, really nonpartisan, and we really go through a very strict process to ensure that's the case. And again, my background as an educator, I know that these kind of resources that you're going to use on campus have to be certifiably nonpartisan. So we absolutely make sure that's the case. So last week as a team, we researched and both candidates' positions. Kamala Harris, we obviously already had Trump done. And we go through the issues and we make lots of notes. We also include references, think really intense college paper. We have all our references on there. And we make these notes and then we distill the notes down into these bite-sized issue stents.
And each hyperlink that you can see, each blue link is a hyperlink to the original source.
Yeah, we make sure that they're hyperlinked so that you can also see the source where we got this from. We don't just go to the candidate's website. We go to reputable news sources. We go to social media. We go to whitehouse.gov. We take our sources from a whole plethora and range. So not just to be giving how the candidates personally see themselves. I was traveling last week and I was actually on a 10-hour flight doing research for some of the guides.
We're so impressed.
It's actually a great way to put time in on an international flight. But the funny thing was, about 3 hours into my research, the man sitting beside me said, I'm really sorry, I'm not trying to be like a nosy neighbor, but I'm just wondering, do you carry out this level of research for every candidate, or is this personal or business related? And I was like, great question. Let's have a conversation. And as it turned out, he actually worked for a school district in Sacramento. I gave him my card. We exchanged information. He's like, oh, we're going to use these. These are amazing. Like, they're really nonpartisan. I was like, yes. So after we go through that research phase, they go off to lawyers and really top lawyers in this sort of C3 nonprofit area. And they confirm, they fact check everything, and they also confirm that the guides, in fact, are nonpartisan. So it's a pretty rigorous process that we go through to ensure the nonpartisanship. It's what our organization is passionate about. This is what we want to provide. And when you're distributing, this is what, we ask people who are distributing the guides to do as well, to deliver them in a nonpartisan way. So, you're not wearing a giant pin saying, vote for XYZ as you're handing out the guide, but you are using them in a nonpartisan way. In addition to our presidential guides, we also have some state-specific guides. On our website, you will find, and later on in the presentation, I can drop some links in the chat, but you will find a production schedule on our website so that you will be able to see, if you're not seeing a guide for your particular state, when that could be produced. We're maybe a few days off schedule just with having to redo the presidential guide, but we're pretty much on track in terms of what the production schedule
Yeah,
says on there.
if you add a week, you'll probably be accurate.
Yeah, because we were prioritizing, and we thought everybody would want to have the presidential guide as soon as possible. So particularly in those key states, the key races, we have some governor races, some Supreme Court races, and some state-specific voting guides as well. We also have what's becoming an increasingly good resource on our site, a guide to detecting disinformation, which is also, a really good resource to utilize whenever you are trying to encourage students to think about where they're getting their information from, and that sources actually do really, really matter as to where we're getting our information from.
Yeah. We also have a guide to the Supreme Court that's on our site, which is really, I think, good for conversations about what have they done over the last 15 years that's consequential, because it's kind of in the shadows, but you look at it and it's like, okay, these are really important things.
Yeah, it's a great resource because there's a lot happening there right now. And as Paul says, it's kind of lurking in the shadows, but maybe something we should all be paying a little bit more attention to. So really invaluable resources. So here is how to use our guide specifically for camper voter engagement. And again, there's a QR code here that you can scan that will bring you directly to our page that relates to ordering print guides and banners. And I'll go through a couple of those resources that we have and how is a really effective way to use our guides for campus distribution. So obviously digital is the easiest way, the most cost-effective way, the easiest way to get our guides out to the largest number of people. So obviously you can use the guides in email bursts. Our guides are available in both English and Spanish, and you can either embed a link, or we have PDF versions that you can also embed in emails or attach to emails. So whatever your preference, but we have.
We're actually going to have a template for like MailChimp and constant contact that will be a pre-formatted thing that people can just like literally drop into it, that our social team who runs Vote Early Day also, they're putting together. So I think that's a new thing this year.
And that will be so handy for organizations, campus clubs, anybody to use. So thank you for mentioning that, Paul. So email is a huge one. Obviously, engage student groups. Because we are an issue-oriented guide, it's really easy to match issues with student clubs and societies on campus. And, they can even just snipping tool, cut that one part from our guide and engage their members that way as well. Obviously, social, we have plug and play resources for you to use on your social media, and I have a slide coming up soon with those, but you'll be able to find those easily on our website along with a promotional toolkit. So we've got lots of resources there. You could also engage your college or campus newspaper is a really great resource. Get them to do a little feature on the upcoming election, guide students towards reputable sources, feature our guides. It's a really great way to be able to point students to great resources. And I would say as an educator and sometimes drop-in administrator, that, getting the support of the administration or departmental chairs will not be a heavy lift on these guides. Interestingly, I had someone from my institution totally randomly on another webinar that we were involved in this week, and they, immediately emailed me and were like, let's use these on our campus. Like, this is great. And I live in Utah, so it may be arguably one of the more challenging states to get voting information out there. And there was a lot of excitement. I know we're kind of an inconsequential state in the scheme of things, but I counted it as a win in terms of, getting some really credible resources in with our student bodies. So in terms of in-person, as I mentioned before, we do have free print guides available and also banners, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. The only thing that we ask if you put in a print order is that you're going to use the guides, that they're not going to sit in a wee box in a cupboard and gather dust and, not be distributed. But if you are all about distributing them, we are on board and happy to provide those print request, fulfill the print requests for you. We there's lots of different ways that you could use print guides on campus. Obviously, events were coming up to the start of the new academic year, so there's going to be a ton of different orientation events. They're really a great opportunity to provide the guides. Dorm storms or storm. Oh, Paul, you're muted.
University of Michigan just emailed and said we're going to use it at orientation and give it out to everybody, which I thought was pretty cool because they're a very large school.
Yeah, it's a wonderful time with a captive audience to be able to just distribute alongside any information. I know that campuses always have a push for voter registration, and it's a really great resource to be able to provide in that moment too. Dorm storms, I always say storm dorms. I always get that phrase mixed up. But dorm storms can also be a great way. You can pin them to people's doors, put them in their mailbox. And I think Paul probably has some examples of specific colleges that have maybe used them well
Yeah,
in their
lots have done that.
dorms.
And the other thing to know on a dorm storm is that the association, it's ACUHO, it's Association of Campus and University Housing Officers, had me do an article for their newsletter that ran this summer, really encouraging people to facilitate dorm storms, or if they really are a little nervous from security about student groups, to do it through RAs. But what it means is that their own organization has essentially encouraged them, and I think that if somebody's nervous, they just, well, look, the QHO newsletter, like your national organization thinks this is a really good idea. And it is an idea. It's a way to reach a lot, because at a table, you'll get whoever comes by, and it's certainly really valuable. But if you're actually hitting, like last year in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, another student group hit every single dorm room at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is a big school. So we're really happy to provide the resources if you've got an ambitious plan, as long as it'll be fulfilled.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and right there on our site, the QR code that was up previously will take you to that print request form site. It's super easy to use on our website. I wanted to give you an idea of what the banners could look like as well. So we can blow the banners up into, is it 2x3, Paul, the
Yeah,
size?
3 foot wide, 2 foot high.
Mhm. So it's a great way for people who are maybe passing by. So like high traffic areas, like outside the student center building, outside the library, any kind of orientation events that you could be having, even outside student housing. But you can see here that they're a really good way to catch attention, to be able to see what the issues are. There's a QR code on there as well that will bring students to our site so that they can check out any of our other resources. And again, these are available free of charge with, the same little caveat that they're going to be utilized in either events or in high traffic areas on campus. On my campus, we have a really high traffic area between like the library and like the rec center part of campus, or lifetime activities or whatever it's called. And there's always tons of posters and things to see. And I know that every campus has those areas of, high traffic where students may take a pause and actually take a look at the posters.
And one thing you can, on the second one, you can't really zero in on it, but what's interesting, the ones that are sort of out on the grass this is Middle Tennessee State, and they actually maybe that's why we're using their image. They came up with this idea, but a bunch of schools have done it since, where you essentially just like put stakes into the grass or poles or whatever it is, because the banners all have grommets on them, just hang them in the stakes. And this is their student union, and it's our we have a national congressional guide that works anywhere. And so they basically just put it on stakes in front of the student union. Everybody who goes into the student union sees the guide. They can grab it on the QR code if they want. And it's just it's an effective way of reaching a ton of people really efficiently. And they just have them up there for the whole election season.
Yeah, which is great moving into the fall. Students are going to be spending time outside on campus, or wherever those high traffic areas are, could be, where everybody's going to eat. Each campus will have their place. Also, if you work for like a campus compact or an organization that's like a network of different campuses, feel free to order these for any events that you could be having as well, where campus partners will be coming to those events. Again, we would be absolutely happy to be able to provide those. These are some examples of our social media. So we have just a ton of memes and GIFs and anything you could ever want in terms of social media on our website to be able to share. You're also welcome to share directly from our Instagram, create a reel, make us a collaborator on there. We love that. And we would love to participate in that. So on our site, you'll find a promotional toolkit and a social media toolkit. There's a link to the social media in the promotional toolkit on there as well. Some other fun resources we have coming up. I apologize, this is really difficult to see because it's under development, but it's a this or that style quiz that students or anybody within your organization for voter engagement would be able to use in terms of looking at the issues. And Paul has a story about that in terms of how this idea came to be to create this quiz.
It's kind of cool. So because in my previous life, I wrote these books on citizen engagement that sold about 300,000 copies. And so I was lecturing at tons of colleges and have not a huge, decent sized personal email list of about 20,000 folks. And one of the person on the list, I guess it was, 6 months ago, emailed me and said, just wanted you to know you might be interested in this. I'm a retired principal, actually in my area across the lake from Seattle, where I live. And I did this project with these low-income youth that I was working with, where I took your 2020 presidential guide and I stripped away Donald Trump and Joe Biden's names and the parties, and I just gave the answers to the questions. And I asked them to look at it, see which ones they agreed with, and then they could, on the third or fourth page, they could find out who said what. And it was kind of an experiment. And she said they loved it. And none of these people were interested in voting before. All of them were interested in voting afterwards. And most of them did. I think all of them were just of the age to be eligible. So most of them did vote. And so I thought, wow, what a fantastic idea. So we're now, the paper works, but it's a little too old school. So we now are doing this. It's almost ready to be released, interactive digital version of the same thing, where they get to see where they align using our guide. And I think it's going to really be cool. I mean, for classes, for groups, for just people to send out to their friends. I think it's a really cool resource. And one other thing that I would note on social is that back in the earlier previous organization, we had quite a few schools who sent it out, at least something on the guides on their entire social platforms. So what that meant is not only did it reach students, it also reached alums, and it's definitely something to aspire to. And if you're working with folks, I mean, generally in any, this is true with all campus email and all campus social, is there's a certain number of key gatekeepers, obviously president's office, deans, sometimes student government, fairly often student government, who basically have permission to broadcast campus wide. And you really want to get those folks promoting the guides, because then you're reaching a huge number of people. So that's very much worth working to. And they are, again, they're really, one thing that the school said that I forgot to say at the beginning is that originally they saw them as, hey, this will help students decide who to vote between candidate A and B. And by another year, they said, well, that's very important, but the really big impact is whether they vote at all. And that's the motivator, is that it will get people to polls, because they don't have the excuses of, oh, they're all the same, I don't like either of them, or I don't know enough. So anyway, that's the history of the quiz.
Thank you, Paul. And just to follow on from Paul's point there, I would argue that most academic institutions, I know it's right up there at the top of our list of college-wide learning outcomes at my institution, is civic engagement.
Right.
So, it's about students being able to make decisions for themselves, but also be informed, not just voting for who their parents voted for or who everybody votes for in their locale, where their community, where the school is located. But civic engagement is, arguably always going to be an outcome, a learning outcome, a college-wide learning outcome, civic literacy, and just actually, being involved. I wanted to highlight as well that because our guides are issue oriented, they really are suitable for cross-discipline use. So a lot of the time, and speaking here as an educator too, when anything comes up about voting or civic engagement, it's like, oh, here's School of Humanities and Social Sciences. This is obviously your domain, like take it. But I would encourage use across the disciplines. I have been reaching out to colleagues in business, in science-oriented disciplines, to be like, hey, look at our section on climate change. These are where, the positions that the candidates have in these areas. So don't limit it to just going to the humanities and social sciences and being like, here are poli-sci professors, here's a great resource for you. They really are suitable for cross-discipline use. Resources like our quiz here that I think should be ready shortly, it's a great tool to embed in Canvas or whatever learning management system that your school uses. I'm also wrapping up working on some discussion type prompts, quizzes, little assignments that can be easily embedded in Canvas or your LMS. And those should be available in the next week or so as well. So again, from the perspective of an educator, I know what it's like to be like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing resource, but also I have no time. So we are making it as easy as possible with, PDFs ready to go, quiz ready to go, social media ready to go, so that it's as accessible and easy as possible for your organization or institution. And we would love to hear a little bit or field any questions that you have in terms of how we can support you in voter engagement. But I'd love Paul to talk for a minute as well about some of our partners. I know it's important to understand the company that you're keeping whenever you're using a resource, and you'd be in really good company with Guides.vote. So if Paul, you could share a bit about our
Sure.
partners.
No, I think that makes sense. And one note on the sort of, which is really, really important, the getting it outside of the usual suspects, social sciences and humanities folks. If you're getting resistance from the say, like, I don't know, the science faculty or the business faculty or the nursing school or whatever. One thing, a bunch of schools did this in Wisconsin 4 years ago, where they actually had the people from the poli-sci department take the resources, and they then sent it out to all the other faculty. So it sort of essentially had kind of the blessing of the poli-sci folks. I mean, that's not the only way to navigate. It can come from it can come anywhere peer to peer, but I think and all of you, I'm sure know the circles of data on participation, and not surprisingly, the departments that focus more on social issues have higher participation voting rates. And so we really want to target the other folks and get this information to them, and getting it out peer to peer is really critical. And we've had, again, by the time I left CEPA, we had something like 400 colleges, and every year we did a survey, and it was like, which resources are useful, which could be, I mean, AGF does the same thing, I think, which could be improved, are there suggestions? And the guides always topped the list, and it always came in, I think the last year, 2020, it came in as like a 9.2 out of 10. And they're just like, yeah, we really like these guides. So I would say that one thing, and if your school sort of like, oh, well, what are these, stressing that these guides have actually been used on campuses since 2012. They've been used extensively at hundreds of schools. There has never been a case where a legislature went after a school because of the guide and said, oh, these are partisan. There's never been a case even where a talk show host went after a school because of the guides. And you know how often talk show hosts and legislatures tend to go after schools for all sorts of things. But because we've just worked so hard on framing them in a way that is neutral, the schools really have loved them. So again, the encouragement that we would give is to, yes, you can have, if you're a fellow, hand them out directly, but really think of the institution as the magnifier, because an awful lot of just institutions have been using them, and they just find them very valuable.
Thanks, Paul. Can you share a little bit about who we are distributing guides with, like our partnership with NAACP and other partners this year
Yeah,
too?
so we've got, so I mean, it's the guides are being distributed by lots of the major campus groups that you folks also work with. So Campus.vote Project and All In Challenge, and those kinds of groups, Campus Compact. So they're coming from some multiple places, and the more people hear about it, it's like, oh, okay, yes, let's do it. We also have major off-campus partners like Nonprofit Vote and NAACP and the US Vote Foundation, and as mentioned, it's up at Teen Vogue. And so it's a really, where we've got, I think, the 5 biggest Latino engagement groups in the country, like Voto Latino, those are going to be distributing it. So it's a pretty wide range. And again, when we spun it off campus, part of it was that they work for all kinds of audiences. So Black Voters Matter did in 2020, they called a Collard Greens Caucus Tour, where they handed out, it was rural African American voters, completely non-college, some non-high school. They handed out the guides with packages of black beans and sheaves of collard greens, and they got a fantastic result. They're now with partners like Cleveland Boats and Good Neighbors of Hampton Roads. They're now distributing 2.5 million guides this year. We've been placing the orders this week, and they're kind of staggering. So far, fundraising is keeping up with it, which is good, because we want to be able to again meet all the demand that's occurring, which is a lot. And so it's campus and community, which means if the campus community service center has partners that they're working with, they can absolutely and we'd love them for the distributed guides. And same thing applies. We're happy to ship them guides to hand out, banners to put up if they've got a physical location. All of those things could really help. So it's pretty wide ranging, and again, just we've gotten great responses. By the way, the little slide that's up there right now, it didn't originally have our logo attached to it, but it was sort of created for us in 22, and it got 5 million. That little GIF got 5 million views. So people like it. It flips back and forth. If it wasn't a slide, you would see it on the end as a GIF flipping back and forth, and people really liked it. So it's a nice one to send out, with obviously a link to the guides. Obviously extremely nonpartisan. It doesn't even mention the candidates. So that was our most popular visual image. We're also
Thanks,
doing
Paul.
TikTok. Oh, we're also doing TikToks that campuses could distribute, and they're basically, we had almost three quarters. We had about 787,000 views. We're going to this time embed some of the content into the guides, which means we're paying the lawyer to watch DC lawyer rates to watch TikToks, but that's part of the deal. It's like, okay, make sure they're nonpartisan, and we have, so you're asking on Nonpartisan Guide for Local Elections. So on our site, under the partners page, there is a resource for how to create your own guide. So we kind of put our secret sauce up there, and we really encourage folks to do it. We're doing 70 guides. That's totally the max of our capacity, but because it's about 50 hours per guide, except for the presidential, which between the two guides is probably 300 hours. And but if you go to that resource on the partners page, you can basically follow the instructions. And I remember flying in to give a talk at a school on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and they said, "Oh, just wanted we'd never worked with them as an institution. They said, just wanted you to know these are the guides we did for our city council, county council, and state legislature using your instructions. We now have actually their guides linked to in the how to create the guides." And what they did is it's a very interesting idea. Again, this is in the document on how to create it. Is they had two poli-sci classes work on them, and they each pushed it as far as they could, and then they swapped, and then they each vetted and edited the other ones, and of course the professor looked at them. So it was a great way to do it, and we really encourage that. That's good.
Awesome, Paul. Thank you. And
Yeah.
as he was saying about this image, we have on our site tons more for you to be able to share. And if you do share the guides, even if you're going for the digital option and not the print order, please let us know. I think Paul bumped into somebody a couple of years ago from the University of Las Vegas, was it? That was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we've been using
Yeah,
them for
this
years.
spring at the campus compact, I was just talking. So, oh, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, you're a big school. We're doing Nevada guides. Do you know about our guides? It's like, yeah, we've been using them for years. We love the guides. We just never bothered to tell you. So I think, I think that's it. And then there's one other thing that I'll just mention, which is, and this is only if you go to our the page on order and guides, it tells you the guides that we can provide, where we can provide guides for these states, like the printed guides. If you're a big school in those states, so this is a fairly small sampling, is like it'd be the 10,000 or bigger schools in those states. If you students happen to be a fan of Parks and Recreation, the actor who played Jerry Gergich, Jim O'Heir, made cameos. He did it for James Madison. Basically used a mini grant. This is 4 years ago to do it, and it got 30,000 views on the various social channels of the schools. So if there was you're at one of those big schools and in one of those states, because again he's got limited time, talk with Claire. And what it does is he's got a video. I think it's actually in the guide on how to distribute on campus, but the guide that he did for James Madison, and he basically says, "Hey, Dukes, here it is." And you also would have to require, the other requirement on our end is you would have to have an official campus website. That's your nonpartisan website, and the guides would have to be visibly pushed on that, as well as voting info. And if it met all those criterias and you were interested, talk to Claire, and we can make it happen, because he said he's happy to do, say 20 or 30 of them over this season, tailored to the schools. It's pretty cool, but it does have to be a big school in the target states, just because it takes him some time and the time is limited.
Yeah, that's a really fun resource. I saw some of his videos from the last election cycle, and they're really a great resource if you're at one of those larger schools. I've dropped my email in chat, and if you would like to have a further discussion about getting the guides out to any of your networks, please drop me an email and we can set up a meeting. And as we were talking about there as well, if you are using the guides or want to use the guides, please let us know. Give us an idea of your distribution numbers, even if it's just digitally, so that we can just, understand who is distributing our guides and how many of them are going out. I see a question in the chat there in terms of, do we have a
Yeah.
list of nonpartisan sources on the site? Paul, do you want to speak to that?
I mean, so you're talking about places for information, or what?
Oh,
Yeah, can you clarify a little bit
um,
more?
so basically, like if we were wanting to add a social media post, that kind of informs our student body on more information on what just recently going on, just so we can have
Right.
more weekly updates and stay involved. What are
Oh,
good
it's interesting.
sources that y'all used in y'all's development of your information things?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, we tend to, if we can, like we link a lot to local newspapers because newspapers are kind of I mean, they're, I'd put them on the Endangered Species Act and give them federal protection and all the rest of that stuff. If you don't have newspapers, a lot of other things collapse. So I think, I mean, and obviously, if you're in a rural area, that's a real problem because they call them news deserts for reasons. If you're in a big city, that makes it easier. But even those big city ones are kind of beleaguered. But I think, like, finding an article that says uh, these are this is where something stands on an issue, and it's tricky because most of them, to make a living, they obviously have to charge, but you can usually get two or three. The model seems to be now you get two or three, sometimes four free articles a month. And so I think I would argue that a local NPR station, the candidate websites obviously are very partisan because their job is to elect the candidates, and we always include them in the guides because maybe somebody wants to volunteer, but they wouldn't be necessarily they certainly wouldn't be a nonpartisan source. They're not just, that's just not their role in the ecosystem. And they may or may not be an accurate source. Some are, some aren't. There's a lot of, one of the things that we do, and again, we sort of worked it out with the lawyers, that if somebody changes a position, how do you deal with this? Because, for example, on abortion, there's a lot of people who say one thing in a primary and another in the general election. And it's different. And so we worked this out with a lawyer, and she's like, okay, you say in the in the 2023, in the primary said X, in the general election said Y. And people then can decide, does that mean that their position is simply they've rethought things and it's evolved? Or does it mean that they're actually kind of trying to run away and hide from what they said earlier? And we don't tell them which one it is. We just ask them to, we just put it out there, and then people can be the judge. Because sometimes people change their beliefs on issues, and sometimes you have, I mean, this is certainly true with the abortion issue, you have campaign consultants saying, okay, now states can do whatever they want, and don't talk very much about a national ban. So you get to decide, man, I'm thinking that because I'm looking at a guide right now, from Nevada, where that's sort of what seems to be happening. I mean, I just got it this morning for sort of semi-final review, but it looks like they're kind of rewriting a stand, and and as I'm going through it, I have a note to myself saying, take a look at the links, see what, is this one of these cases? Or maybe it isn't one of these cases. But I think, in terms of the sources, I would say getting people towards some of those, for all their limits, the mainstream news sources, for lack of a better word. I think that's actually can be quite useful, as opposed to everything in the, you think, okay, you're getting this honest thing on social media, but it's basically an algorithm directing you to Russian bots. That's not always such a reliable source.
No, don't go walk towards that light. Definitely, definitely not. I know we're almost out of time, so I just wanted to check in to see if there were any other questions, and also wanted to mention that if you are hosting a webinar similar to this that you would like somebody from Guides.vote to drop into to, discuss the guides or to explain our process, drop me an email for that. as well, and we could most likely figure that out with schedules. So any other questions? Thank you, Kaylee. Any last words, Paul?
We like hearing that our guides rock. So, if we were to briefly explain to someone passing by how the guides are nonpartisan, basically what we would say is that there's guides that imply a presumed answer. Yeah, it is a great question. There's a lot of guides that imply a presumed, here's the right answer. And do they agree with our position? And there's nothing wrong with guides like that as long as that's clear. But that's not a nonpartisan guide. It's a partisan guide, or it's a partisan lean guide. What ours are trying to do is to say, all right, what do they actually say? What do they actually stand for? How do the candidates differ? And again, because they all include the links, which is something that didn't include when we started 10 years, 12 years ago, but they do now, they can check and see, like, is this a valid summary of the position? When we send to the lawyers, that's one of the things they're scrutinized. They go to literally every link, and we're paying, I mean, it's a ridiculous DC lawyer rate for them to go through every link and say, okay, does that reflect what you're saying? Or are you kind of shading it? We try to avoid, when we are linking, it's not always possible, but as much as possible, we'll link to a news reporting piece as opposed to, say, an opinion piece in the same paper. We'll try and go upstream. Where's the source? Even, it's not a perfect, you go on Twitter X and you go to an original source of a post, and then there are people trying to spin it in the comments because that's what people do, especially if it's a high profile electoral figure like one of the presidential candidates. But it gives people a sense. I would say if someone looks at our guide and they go through all those sources, they get a pretty good sense of how it was created, what was assembled, which questions. I mean, because our genesis was on campus, we still lean a little bit towards questions that are interested for youth. So, like, we have a student debt question. Not every guide would, but for guides that have large student populations, that's pretty important. And so that's essentially how we do. I mean, when on the presidential guide, it got looked at by former Republican Secretary of State of my state, Washington, one Democrat and two Republican former Congress people. We try and vet these things really seriously. The lawyer, she used to be the number one lawyer at the Humane Society, number two at American Cancer, and her political law group was headed by the general counsel for John McCain and Mitt Romney. So we really take this stuff seriously, and that gives it its credibility.
We're on our 52-second countdown. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. And I think, 3 short points about how we are provably nonpartisan is we're independently funded. We have a range of sources in our research, and we have a legal vetting process to confirm our nonpartisanship. So thank you all so much for being here today. I'm so happy Paul Loeb, our finder, was able to join us too. And please reach out. We are happy to support you in any and all voter engagement efforts, print, digital, webinars, whatever you need, just reach out. So enjoy the rest of the 64 to 24 webinar, and great to see everybody.